m'appelle Tonee Ndungu. Je suis du Kenya. That's what I was supposed to say? That's it? Yeah. My French is over. I am done. I've done my cultural work for the day and we are finished. Back to English. My name is Tonee. I'm from Kenya. I'll be very, very quick. I think she's really summarized a lot of things. And I just want to talk really quickly about business in Kenya and just be straightforward to it. It's going to be a question-answer session, so I'm going to be, again, very, very quick. Feel free to start thinking through the questions you have if you have any. Don't be shy. It's not nice. My background is international relations and journalism. I was in school for 10 years to get those degrees. I'm dyslexic. It takes me a longer time to graduate than average. I've never picked them up, so I'm going to try before I turn 40 to do that. But when I was in uni, I started an incubator, which is basically a space about 10 times this size, and I asked people who have got ICT ideas to come, we turn them into businesses. About 6 people came, half not sure what an ICT business looks like, and 2.5 months later, we sold the first company for $312,000. That means that we had something. It's not bad. To then what was Motorola, which Google bought after that. 3.5 years after that, as I was turning 30, we raised 5.5 million euros for what then became the NILab or Nairobi Labs. It was one of the biggest hubs in East Africa. And together with the NILab and the iHub, we started what is called the Silicon Savannah. Some of you have heard of that. All these tech companies in East Africa doing stuff. The most important conversation about that was how to launch a business in Kenya. How do you start a business in Africa? I don't know about the continent because I've not traveled to more than 10 countries in Africa, but I know that the best startup is one that solves a very genuine and real problem. Everywhere, if you're solving a problem, you have a business. There's nothing unique about the continent. It's extremely similar to things here in Brussels or in any part of the world, whether it's Nice or Nicaragua. It doesn't matter where it is. It needs to solve a real problem. The only difference is, do you understand your audience? Because whereas in Europe and the US, the audiences are very much the same. You kind of all use Facebook, kind of all use Instagram, kind of all drive, kind of all live in houses that have power. Africa is not that. It's very diverse. But people still have needs. And if you can solve those needs, you can easily build a company that is sustainable and it's having an impact. This was what the NILab looked like. And since I've left, they've done cool things. Now they have a club every Friday night. The president comes every 2 or 3 months. We add value to companies like the Google, Facebooks, and Google, Facebook, and there's another one. I'm not sure which one, that is trying to provide free internet across the continent. And that space is no bigger than an average office block. But last year, because of that space, $216 million was invested in East Africa. There's really nothing complicated about starting a company in Africa, really, except everything that is complicated about starting a company in Africa. The expertise, developers, support, finance, and all these. I think the most important thing when you're trying to start a business or when you're trying to grow a business is understanding where your finance is coming from and where your finance is going. Cash flow. You know these things. But the most crucial thing in our continent is not cash flow, surprisingly. Cash flow is not a problem for businesses. You can have tons of cash and have completely no problem as long as you've got what we call customer growth, which is different from customer retention. Africa is one of the places where you're going to get a customer today and not get them for 6 months. What are you going to do between that time? That's why our businesses are so different. Here you get a person to come and buy your product or get your flowers or get whatever it is you're shipping, and then you see them tomorrow or next week. In my continent, a person can only afford to have that service once or twice in X period of time. If you have the X period of time included in your little business, then chances are you're going to have success. Let me give you a practical example of Kitabu. You've seen the video, right? So you understand kind of what we do. We've taken textbooks, which everybody here has bought for themselves or will buy for someone, and we've put them on a mobile device and allowed people to rent them for an hour, a day, a week, a month, or a term. The reality is, no one's going to rent that book every day. Chances are you're not going to find those people. So the question is, if this half is renting on Monday, do I know that this half is going to rent on Tuesday? If this half is not going to rent on Tuesday and only this half rents on Tuesday, am I sure those are going to rent on Wednesday? If those ones rent on Wednesday, am I sure some of these are going to come back on Thursday? And that's why Africa is having a better time of making businesses that don't fail than you. Because we never use credit to pay for anything. We use money we have in our pockets. Which is the second thing about financing. So you talk about what's your cash flow going to look like. The next thing is understand there's no credit in my space. I have never borrowed a bank loan? Ever? No. They won't give me. I don't have a credit rating. How? All my cards are debit. Everything I buy cash. And that's most of 60% of the country, if not 80% of the continent. This is interesting for you to know. This one you can read. So in a country like Kenya where you have 44 million people, about 28 million of them use their mobile phones to pay for stuff every day. 28 million every day. 28 million every day. There are 44 million people, 28 million every day use their mobile phones to pay for things. So if you were a bank or a shop or a supermarket or a school chain or whatever it is you were, why wouldn't you put your services on mobile devices? So herein is the next problem. There's a bank called Stanbic Bank that is going to let go of 1,000 of its 2,000 people staff. Why? Because they don't need them anymore. Because nobody goes to the bank. At all. At all. The Kenyan government pays its staff members through mobile phones. So their biggest bank, Cooperative Bank of Kenya, which is the one that used to bank all these people, now has 700 different offices and little spaces and little clubs that they call bank zones and nobody goes to. Because if the government pays you on mobile phone and I can pay my rent from the mobile phone, I never need to walk in, there are no more checkbooks in my country. There's none. It's inter-account transfer on my mobile phone. So being able to create an industry around innovations that work around the continent is how your business is going to survive. I hope you're seeing yourself in my shoes and seeing the opportunity that exists for you. Finally, tips for European startups to expand their value proposition, The thing that you need to understand is you have a new enemy. And the new enemy is not China, and the new enemy is not business competition, No. The new enemy you have is standards. You see, we know what it now looks like to be served well. We have Uber in Kenya, so do we have Lyft. We've got things from Texas, we've got things from Europe, we've got free taxi ride companies from Kenya. The services that we are receiving as Africans are very much the same services a lot of people are receiving around the world. I use the same Uber account I use at home to get myself a taxi airport to the taxi, to and fro. The standards are the same. So your new enemy is that we expect more. Now, of course, it's not everyone in the continent. I'm Tonee. I am one of the 37% of the people in the African continent who can be called a middle class. I've traveled out of the continent, but more of us are doing it than Europeans are, more of us are doing it than Americans are, and more of us are doing it than Asians are. So there are more mobile Africans, continent-wise, out of continent, than any other continent in the planet. So your real competition is our standards. And do not be fooled when people tell you Africans don't have money. Wow, that would be a stupid mistake to make. Yes, most Africans don't have the kind of money you think, but a ton of us do. A lot of us. Let me give you a practical example. That mobile money thing I told you about, every 3 months, a third of Kenya's GDP is moved on mobile phones. A third. A third. So why don't we have money? If it's not banks moving into banks, it's people moving into, there is money in the country. And this is why you see a lot of the times, you're finding Chinese companies coming, partnering with African companies and mining now, and competing with Australian companies that used to predominantly own the mining industry. That's why you see a country like Kenya having the largest wind grid on earth. Largest, 7,614 kilometers square of renewable energy. Who are we selling it to? These are people's lands. That's why you're finding us investing $2, $3, $4 billion in putting a railway track between 700 and 1,000 years later than you guys. But yeah, 1,000, 2,000, yeah, about. But then we're doing it now because we understand that there's a lot of opportunity for technology and movement and motion and a lot of opportunity for people to make more money. Finally, my greatest advice to anyone who wants to ask me about doing business in the continent is go there. Even if you're scared and you want to stay in a hotel room the entire time, just go. Your interaction with a cab driver is going to be good. Just go. Pick a country. There are 54 of them. If you're a high-risk kind of individual, South Sudan is where you want to go. If you're low risk, I don't know, South Africa, Kenya perhaps, Ghana, Mali, even Nigeria is quite cool. I hear there's tons of rich people there. Figure out what it is you're trying to do in the African continent, and then go and find out if you're right or wrong. Important to note, as of a report written last year, that I think came out in February, the third largest investor community in East Africa is non-East African. So we have Ivy League students out of Stanford and all these American universities, and then Oxford, all these British, and they come, start a business, 1 acre fund, there are like 50 of them that I know off the top of my head, and they raise $500,000 pretty easily, because for them that's not a lot of money, and they've got very nice department sectors and partners in the US who are willing to lose $500,000 in the name of impact. But these companies are doing really well for very many people, because they decided, oh, we are tourists, we must go to Kenya and see what is there. And then they turn them into businesses. So those are my few pieces of advice. Does anybody have any question before I go sit down? Anyone? Question? Or is there a question session later? Question? Gerald, do you have a question? Yeah. Like, we've been together the entire time. How are you asking me a question?
Okay. I'm part of the Echoing Green Fellowship, and a report was released that showed, I think when they carried out a survey amongst the previous fellows of color, that's fellows who are black and over there, had difficulties raising beyond a certain threshold, which figure was about 3 times higher for fellows who are not of color. How do you think this whole issue of the color barrier can be overcome in increasing investments, particularly? You gave the example of Stanford and many of the startups in Africa that come, and it's Ivy League students that are starting up the things. How do you think that issue can be addressed?
I think on a micro level, I mean, on a top level kind of thing, I'm always open to businesses from everywhere, black, white, brown, and everything in between, coming into the continent, because it fosters employment, allows people to lift their life standards, standards of living. So I'm open to it. On a micro level, like personally, I really am displeased by those numbers. The same report I just mentioned highlights that for every 1 African investee, there are 7 non-African investees. So it's a 1 in 7 ratio, and it's a disastrous ratio. But I understand it. It makes sense for an American to invest in another American, the same way it makes sense for a Kenyan to invest in a Kenyan. It makes sense for a Belgian to invest in another Belgian in Chile or Kenya or Cameroon. Then it makes for a Kenyan to invest, Belgian to invest in a Kenyan. He doesn't understand the culture, the traditions, That's why I always believe that there's a very big responsibility for people in the diaspora. You're from Congo, right? Do you send any money home? You send it to your family members, right? And your friends as well. Have you invested in any businesses in Africa? Now, there's more opportunities for people like him to do the same. You need to start putting money back in the continent. So if you are in Belgium and you have a native, wherever your native is, even if you're Irish or whatever, put money back in the businesses that matter to you. Because it's a responsibility Africans have towards Africans, not Europeans having towards Africans or Americans having towards Africans or anything of the sort. And that's something that's going to happen only if you and me become billionaires, right? Or millionaires, right? You know what I'm saying? So we need to get our act together and do that. Yeah? Is that right? Yeah, that's what I think.